We seldom find an organisation that doesn't have an organisation chart of some sort. Sometimes staff in organisations without a formal chart can still draw it for you. Such charts are sometimes more fluid and less formal and regimented these days, but it remains a reasonable expectation to understand how the organisation is structured and how authority and delegation levels are shaped. Then we add a process architecture. Have we just redrawn the organisation chart? If we are now managing across the organisation, do we still need an org chart? Can an organisation chart and a process architecture coexist? It's a seemingly small but very important concept. A process architecture is not just a different version of the organisation chart. And when we're building a process architecture, we need to be careful we don't get them confused, because if we do, we might end up building something that doesn't really exist. A quick reminder of what I mean by process architecture, or we'll use the term enterprise process architecture to mean the same thing. So we've got three sections to the process architecture. We've got at the top shared management processes, in the middle core processes, and at the bottom those shared support processes. So the shared support processes are the ones that enable the organisation to work. The shared management processes are largely about executive decision making and related matters, and the core processes are the ones that are directly executing the organisational strategy. So it's the core processes that make us who we are, and management and support processes quite common across many different organisations, at least at the higher levels. And then we can, for any of those processes, we can decompose them down as many levels as we need to build understanding or be able to do further analysis, etc. So that's a process architecture. Let's have a think about process architectures and organisation charts and their relationship to strategy. So we start with strategy. If we're building an organisation, designing it, coming up with an organisation chart, it obviously relates to strategy. And in the same way, when we're building a process architecture, we literally start with the strategy. In my projects, we would start with the actual mission, vision, purpose statement, whatever it's called, and we'd start with that statement of strategic intent, and we'd go through there looking for the promises that we make and to whom those promises are made. You might literally do that with a highlighter pen, looking for the verbs, because that'll give you some pointers to those value propositions or promises. And then from that, we're able to find our highest level processes and decompose down. So a very tight coupling between the process architecture and the strategy, and certainly a coupling between the strategy and the organisation design or org chart. But no coupling at all between the process architecture and the organisation chart. None at all. I mean, they're unrelated views of the same organisation for sure, but they're derived in different ways. They're tools used for different purposes, and we don't mean them to be in any way one to be a facsimile of the other. Let's have a think about change in all three of those elements. If the strategy changes, the process architecture or the enterprise process architecture, the EPA, will change, because the process architecture identifies how we execute the strategy. So, of course, it changes. Now, if it's a big change in strategy, it's a big change in the process architecture, and a small change might just relate in a small change, but a change is pretty much inevitable. So we will change the EPA if the strategy changes, for sure. So if the strategy changes, it implies a change of EPA. However, if we change the organisation chart, we have a reorganization, that says nothing about changing the EPA. It won't cause in itself a change from the process architecture because the strategy hasn't changed. We had a great example of that in a project I worked on once for a central bank. We were literally halfway through the building of the process architecture, and we came in one morning and here's the announcement: massive change, whole new organisation chart. I mean, everybody was in a new division and department. There were 3 divisions the day before, now there are 5. They've all got different names. I mean, the biggest change you could imagine. What impact did that have on the process architecture we were building? Nothing, because the strategy hadn't changed. Not a word, not a comma, nothing had changed. So different people were going to be doing different things, but the processes themselves didn't need to change because the strategy hadn't changed. When we are doing those kinds of projects and when we're dealing with the process architecture as a management tool, the question often comes up, where's my department? Where's my team? Where am I? And that's a good question, and it's good that people ask, and it's also good in a way that they can't find their department, obviously, in the process architecture, because it means we've nicely decoupled the horizontal and the vertical management of the organisation. So don't be put off by that question. It's a question to be welcomed because it's a learning opportunity to explain why the process architecture is not another version of the org chart, and that's why you can't find your department or team there quite as easily as you might have expected. So how do we summarise this? So clearly the architecture is not the org chart. If we change the chart, then we're not going to change the process architecture, and we certainly won't change strategy. If we change strategy, we will change the process architecture, and that might also, the change of strategy might also mean some change in the organisation chart. We also, of course, change the process architecture, don't we? Because we'll think of new ways of executing strategy. So when we do that, then we're not changing the strategy, we're just thinking of new ways of executing the same strategy. And those changes might result in changes to the organisation chart as well. But it's the nature of the change that we're making that is changing both the process architecture and the organisation chart, rather than a direct coupling between the architecture and the chart. So we're talking about two different things, and we need them both. They're both important, they're different perspectives, they're both valuable but unrelated management tools. One thing for us to keep in mind as we think about the difference between the vertical and the horizontal, or the org chart and the process architecture, we worry a lot in our organisations, and rightly so, about functional silos, how the organisation seems to be divided up into these slices or boxes on the org chart, and there's not enough interaction between them. So what we don't want to do, though, is change those functional silos for process tunnels. That doesn't solve a problem. We haven't just taken the org chart and rotated it 90 degrees. That's not what this is about. We're going to have two perspectives of management. We're going to manage in the vertical, mainly via the organisation chart, and then in the horizontal or cross-functional or end-to-end processes, mainly via our process architecture. Important to keep in mind that that's an important characteristic of having both a process architecture and an organisation chart. So the thing for us to keep in mind as we think about process-based management and the use of process architectures is that we're always talking about something real, and we don't want to be confused between the organisation chart and the process architecture, or we might end up offering to the organisation something that actually doesn't exist. We've got to keep in mind that elephants and zebras are different things, and they both play a different and important role in the ecosystem, just as process architecture and an organisation chart plays a different and important role in our organisational ecosystem. Thanks for joining me for this Process Insight. I hope you found it useful. If so, there are plenty more in the series. Please let me know in the comments. Don't be shy, you have my contact details. I love talking and answering questions about process matters with people around the world. Also, please let me know about other topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. And thanks for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you.